It was a rainy Thursday evening in the quiet suburban town of Westfield when 18-year-old Grace Lorne vanished without a trace. A senior in high school, Grace was described as kind, quiet, and always helpful. The sort of girl whose smile warmed even the dullest morning. That evening, she was walking home after study group. Her friends saw her turn down Maple Street, the road that led directly to her family home. But somewhere between the streetlight and her front porch, Grace Lorne disappeared. Police combed through woods, rivers, and abandoned warehouses. Helicopters hovered. Posters went up. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And through it all, her father, Richard Lorne, stood at the center of every press conference, pale, trembling, and teary-eyed. The image of a desperate father, begging for his little girl to come home. But what no one knew was that Grace never left that house at all. The investigation was relentless at first. Neighbors recalled hearing nothing unusual, just thunder that night and a barking dog down the road. Grace's phone was found 2 blocks away, near a drainage ditch. The screen cracked but still faintly glowing when police arrived. Her mother, Ellen, couldn't sleep. She kept Grace's bedroom door open, whispering prayers every night, waiting for her daughter's footsteps on the porch. In time, the town's curiosity faded, the flyers peeled, the news crews left. And in the Lorne home, silence grew thicker by the day. Richard became withdrawn. He stopped attending church. He locked himself in his study for hours. To everyone else, he was a man broken by loss. But behind that locked basement door was the very girl he claimed to be searching for. Grace's world became 12 feet by 15. The basement, once a storage space, turned into a cell, windowless, damp, and lit only by a flickering bulb. Richard told her that no one was looking for her anymore, that the world had moved on, that she was safer down there, where no one could hurt her. The days blurred. She had no sense of time, no sunrise, no nightfall, only footsteps above, the creak of the floorboards, and the slow, haunting rhythm of her own breathing. He controlled everything, when she ate, when she slept, when she could speak. He brought her old clothes, notebooks, sometimes even magazines, reminders of a world she could no longer touch. At first she cried out, screamed for her mother, for anyone. But the basement walls kept secrets. No one heard. And upstairs, Ellen's life disintegrated. She'd sit by the window, clutching Grace's photograph, unable to accept what her husband said, that their daughter must be gone forever. But Grace wasn't gone. She was underneath them, hearing every word, every tear, every prayer, and knowing she could never answer. Years passed, seasons changed. Grace learned to survive. She kept track of days by scratching the wall, one line for every sunrise she imagined. She counted over 7,000. In that time, her father became something else. Not a parent, not a protector, but a captor. He isolated her completely, controlling her through fear, guilt, and dependence. When she turned 20, the unthinkable began. Richard's obsession turned darker. He began to blur the lines between father and owner. Grace fought back, cried, begged, but over the years resistance turned to silence. Her identity slowly fractured. The girl who once dreamed of college, of travel, of love, became a shadow of herself. By 22, she had her first child, a boy. She delivered him alone, terrified, guided only by whispered instructions and a blood-stained towel. He became her only comfort, her reason to stay alive. Over the next 2 decades, she bore 4 more. 5 children, all born beneath the floorboards of the same house that once held her laughter. None had ever seen the sky. She taught them letters using old cereal boxes, told them stories about the world above, a world they thought was make-believe. They believed the basement was the world. By the time Grace was 40, her eldest daughter Lily had begun asking questions. Why could they hear footsteps but never see the people? Why did their home have no windows? Grace couldn't lie anymore. She whispered the truth, and for the first time, her children realized the horror of their existence. But Lily was strong. She began watching her grandfather, the man she only knew as father. She noticed the times he came, the moments the locks clicked, the way he left keys on the table near the stairs. Then, one night, Lily fell sick. High fever, convulsions. Grace panicked. For the first time, she begged Richard to take her child outside, to a hospital. He refused, for days, until, finally, fearing he'd lose his perfect world, he agreed. He allowed Grace and Lily to step out for the first time in 22 years. Grace's eyes burned in the sunlight. The air tasted new. The world she thought had forgotten her was still there, waiting. At the hospital, a nurse noticed the strange behavior, the scars, the fear. Grace couldn't stop trembling, and when Lily whispered, "We've never been outside before," the truth unraveled. Flashback to when Grace was first kidnapped by her father Richard. Grace wakes up to the sound of dripping. A single bulb flickers overhead, casting a pale light across the concrete walls. Her wrists ache, her throat is dry. The air smells like metal and dust. She tries to stand, but her legs buckle. The world spins. When she finally steadies herself, she realizes she's not in her bedroom, not even close. The space is small, too small. No windows, a single steel door. And then she hears it. The slow mechanical click of a lock sliding shut above her head. At first, she thinks it's a mistake. Maybe her father locked her in by accident. But as the hours turn into days, and the food tray begins to appear through a slot at the bottom of the door, she understands. She isn't missing. She's been hidden. He comes down only at night. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, predictable. He brings food, bread, water, sometimes fruit. He doesn't speak much, just watches her. When Grace tries to scream, he slaps her. Not out of rage, but control. He tells her the world outside has fallen apart, that the air is poisoned, that monsters roam the streets. He says, "You're safe here. I saved you." At first, Grace doesn't believe him. She pleads, cries, scratches the door until her nails bleed. But no one comes. No one ever comes. Days blur into nights, weeks into months. The walls start to feel closer, and slowly, she stops counting the days. Silence becomes her only companion. The silence and the voice in her own head. The one that whispers, "Hold on, someone will find you." But time changes things. Her father begins to speak more. Sometimes he sits with her, bringing books from her old room. He tells her stories, rewritten, distorted versions of the truth. She learns to listen carefully, to speak softly, to survive quietly. There are days he's gentle, days he's a stranger. He strips her off and forces himself on her without an atom of mercy. And one day, something worse happens. Grace doesn't talk about that night. Not then, not for many, many years. When Grace turns 20, she begins to feel something change inside her. Her body aches, she's nauseous. At first she thinks it's the lack of sunlight. But soon she knows. She's pregnant. The realization crushes her. She screams, begs, pounds the walls until her fists bruise. He tells her, it's God's plan. There are no doctors, no medicine, just a bucket of water and torn towels. 9 months later, a child's cry echoes through the basement. A sound so pure it cuts through years of darkness. Grace names him Samuel. Her father calls him the gift. From that moment, she lives for someone other than herself. The pain is unbearable, but Samuel's laughter, his small, bright laughter, becomes her only proof that light still exists. Years pass. Samuel grows, curious, innocent. Then comes another child, then another, until the basement is filled with 5 small voices. Each time she gives birth, Grace feels herself breaking and rebuilding. Like her soul has learned to split just to survive. The children grow up in that small room. They think the outside world is a lie. They believe the sun is a story, that monsters wait beyond the concrete walls. Grace doesn't correct them. She can't. To keep them calm, she teaches them lessons, songs, words. She draws stars on the ceiling with chalk, paints clouds on old sheets, makes paper birds out of scraps. In that darkness, she becomes their universe. But even in her carefully built world, cracks begin to show. Her oldest child, Mary, starts asking questions. What's above us? Why does Father lock the door? Why don't we ever see the sky? Grace tries to silence her. Mary is relentless, being the oldest girl next to Samuel. Curious like Grace once was. And curiosity is dangerous here. Her father begins to lose patience. He yells more and threatens more. If they try to tamper with the electric locks, they all would die in there. He locks them longer some days without coming down the basement. One night, Grace hears him whisper through the door, "If you make them question me again, I'll take them away." For the first time, Grace feels something stronger than fear. Hatred. But she hides it. She waits. She endures. Because survival now isn't just hers. It belongs to 5 small hearts that depend on her. It happens one summer. The air thick, the basement hotter than usual. Mary collapses. Fever. Her skin burns. She vomits. Shivers. Grace begs him for help, but he refuses. He says, she'll recover, they always do. But the fever doesn't break. Mary's eyes roll back. Her breathing slows. Grace kneels, screaming, "Please, please, she's dying!" For hours, silence. Then finally, the sound of the lock. He opens the door. Light floods in for the first time in 2 decades. Blinding, holy, unforgiving. He lifts Mary in his arms and climbs the stairs. Grace follows, trembling, shielding her eyes. Her children gasp, seeing colors they've only imagined. They've stepped into the world. For the first time. Grace stands at the foot of the stairs. She can see the hallway she once knew, dusty now, filled with the ghosts of years lost. As her father disappears outside with Mary, she feels something break inside her. Not fear, not despair, freedom. She knows he'll return. She knows this moment won't last. But for the first time, she sees the way out. And when he comes back, the police are behind him. Neighbors had seen him carrying a sick teenager, a girl too old to have been hidden. They called for help. Within hours, the nightmare collapses under the weight of truth. Neighbors crowded the driveway. Police lights flashed red and blue against the old brick house that had buried her story. Back at the Lorne house, officers broke through the cellar door. Beneath the wooden floors, they found what no one was ready to see. A maze of narrow corridors, sealed rooms, chains, and makeshift bedding. 5 children huddled together under a flickering bulb, wide-eyed and silent. None of them screamed. They had never learned how to. Grace clung to them as paramedics wrapped blankets around their shoulders. For a moment she felt weightless, like she was hovering between 2 worlds, one ending, one beginning. At first, no one recognized her. She was gaunt, hollow-eyed, a stranger. But when the name Grace Lorne surfaced from old records, the shock rippled through the town like a wave. The missing girl had come home. Detectives moved carefully through the underground maze. The air was heavy with dust, decay, and time itself. Journals lined the walls, decades of entries, each page marked by Grace. Handwriting. Some were desperate cries for help. Others, stories she wrote for her children to keep them from fearing the world they'd never seen. And in the farthest corner, a single phrase scratched into the wall. "We are still here." The world above had forgotten her, but she had refused to disappear. When the police arrived at Ellen Lorne's door that morning, she didn't understand at first. The words made no sense. "Found alive. Your daughter." The basement. But when she saw the photos, the narrow walls, the children's faces, something inside her broke beyond repair. For 22 years she had lived in mourning beside the man who caused it all. The father who'd wept on television had been the architect of their suffering. The monster has been here all along. Ellen's screams echoed down the hallway, grief and disbelief colliding into something uncontainable. And yet, beneath the pain, there was one fragile spark of light. Her daughter was alive. Grace couldn't face her now aged mother as a result of pain and betrayal, as she felt her mother could have somehow knew what has been going on. Grace's rehabilitation was slow. Sunlight made her flinch. Crowds triggered panic. Even silence frightened her, because it sounded too much like the basement when her father left for days. But she was not alone anymore. Her children, wide-eyed, fragile, curious, began to learn the world one sensation at a time. The sound of rain on windows, the feel of grass between their toes, the laughter of other children at the park. Each discovery was a small miracle. Grace learned too, how to eat at a table again, how to walk without fear, how to sleep in a bed that wasn't locked behind a door. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of survival. Months later, Grace stood at the edge of the property where it all began. The house had been sealed and condemned. Vines crept over the walls, nature quietly reclaiming what evil had built. In her hands, she held a new journal, her own story, written freely, no longer hidden in the dark. Her final entry read, "He built walls to keep me silent. I broke them to let my children see the sky." She closed the book and looked up. The same sky she'd once painted on the ceiling of the basement. But this time, it wasn't a dream. It was endless. Grace smiled, not because she'd forgotten, but because she had finally remembered who she was before the darkness. Her father was led away in silence, his wrists bound, head low. He didn't resist. Perhaps even he knew it was over. As the police car pulled out of the driveway, Grace looked up at the stars. Real stars, not the ones she'd drawn on the basement ceiling, and whispered a silent promise to herself. "This time, I'll live." In the sterile white of the hospital, time slowed again. Doctors whispered words she barely understood. Malnutrition, infection, psychological trauma. Her children, confused by light and noise, clung to each other in corners. For Grace, every heartbeat echoed 2 decades of silence. She hadn't felt sheets. She hadn't smelled soap. The first shower burned like fire against her skin. But it also washed away pieces of the basement. The dirt, the fear, the silence. Therapists asked questions she couldn't yet answer. Reporters camped outside. The world wanted to know the story of the woman beneath. But Grace didn't speak. Not yet. Her story became headlines overnight. A nation mourned and marveled. People left flowers outside the house, lit candles on sidewalks. But with sympathy came intrusion. Commentators debated how no one had noticed. Some blamed the mother, Others blamed the system. Through it all, Grace stayed silent, because the truth was still too heavy to share. Months later, she faced him again, in court. Her father looked smaller now, stripped of power. When the prosecutor read the charges, abduction, assault, murder of innocents, the words echoed through her bones. Grace didn't cry. She simply stared ahead, her hands trembling on her lap. For the first time, the world heard what happened below that house. The evidence, the years, the children, the horror. When the verdict came, life imprisonment without parole, the room exhaled. But Grace didn't feel victory. She felt something quieter. In therapy, she learned to breathe again. She watched her children take their first real steps in parks, saw them laugh at things she'd forgotten existed. Birds, clouds, the wind. She kept a small box of reminders, a broken piece of the basement wall, a paper bird she'd made in the dark, a chalk star. They weren't symbols of pain anymore, but proof that she survived. Grace began to write. Each page bled with truth, but ended with hope. Her words reached others trapped in invisible prisons, abuse, silence, fear. And slowly letters began to arrive from around the world. They called her the woman who found the sky. Years later, Grace stood outside the rebuilt house, now an empty shell, grass reclaiming its roots. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind move through open windows where there were once walls. Her children were grown now, alive, laughing, free. The world had become theirs. Grace smiled. Not because she forgot, but because she remembered, and still chose to live. She whispered, "Darkness can hold you, but it cannot keep you." As the sun dipped behind the trees, the house stood silent once more. Not a prison anymore, but a monument to survival. For 22 years, Grace lived beneath the world. But in the end, she didn't just escape. She rose. Because freedom isn't the absence of walls. It's the courage to walk beyond them. Grace's story reminds us that even in the darkest places, the human spirit refuses to die. For 22 years, her world was nothing but walls, horror, and silence, yet she survived. She fought for her children, for light, for freedom. And when the world forgot her, she never forgot herself. This story isn't just about pain. It's about resilience, the power of a mother's love, and the courage to begin again. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a comment below. Your support helps bring more powerful true stories like this to life. Remember, hope always finds a way to rise.